What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Automotive Chaos. Today we are going to be doing something a little bit different. I think so far the only thing that we've worked on has been the Camaro. So today we have the 57. I think the only time that I actually showed this car was on the intro to the channel video. Today I had a couple people come over. We moved the Camaro outside and got this inside. So, I mean, there's a laundry list of things that this car needs. Obviously, you can tell just by looking at it. But what we are going to do is we are going to be mounting that seat. We'll be cleaning up the floors, or what's left of the floors, a little bit, and painting it just so it looks somewhat uniform in there. We have to do a brake line in the rear because I went to bleed the brakes today and that exploded all over. So that needs to get done, and we need to get this thing running. Now, I put a new fuel tank in this car shortly after I got it. I ended up running a new fuel line. That's not going to open because of the garage door. That's awesome. So I ran a new fuel line with the new sending unit from the tank all the way up. There's about a 5-inch section that I need to complete from the fuel pump to the hard line that I ran. So I need one fitting, some rubber fuel line, and then after the fuel line, we can get this thing hopefully running, hopefully driving, get some brakes, those are optional, and see if we can get this thing down the road for the first time. And I don't even know, I'd have to look at the registration. I have the transferable Reggie for this car. I think it was the 80s, but I'll get that and I'll show that. So yeah, that's gonna be it. We have a decent amount of work cut out for us. Unfortunately, none of this is gonna be really finessed at all. It's just gonna be jam it back together, and hopefully it runs, drives, and most importantly stops. So let's get started. Alright, so this is the piece that we are having the issue with. So this was the line that blew out, but now this inverted flare, the tube nut, won't actually thread back in to this junction. So we need to take that out and figure out if this is cracked or if the thread somehow got damaged, which I don't know how, because I mean the rest of this car is in such good shape underneath. I don't see why that fitting would be compromised, but it seems like that's what we're going to deal with. So I'm going to take that out, we'll inspect that, and then if we need to order a new one, we will take care of that so we can get this thing to stop. So I figured out the problem with the junction piece in the rear. The port to the driver's side, one of the threads was wrecked in there. So I pulled this out of the car. I ended up running a thread chaser through it. So that is cleaned up. I tested it with a tube nut. It goes all the way in and gets tight now. So we're good on that. And then this is the last brake line in the car to be replaced. So I bought another section of brake line yesterday. I don't know where I put it, of course. But I bought a new piece of brake line. I'm going to cut that, bend it, flare it. We'll get that back in the car along with this, and brakes should be done. So I'll get started on that. Alrighty. This new line is made up, flared. I remember to put the tube nut on there. This is what I use to flare the lines. This thing is worth every single penny. It's made by Master Cool, and after messing around with those little bricks with the clamps, there's no comparison. So new line is made. I'm going to go back under the car, reinstall the junction block, put this in, give the pedal a few pumps. Hopefully we don't hear any more water fountains underneath the car, and brakes will be done. So see you guys when I'm done. Okay, brake line is back in the car. pumped the pedal a few times. I didn't hear any water shooting out or the sound of water shooting out, so we should be good there. Next up, we're going to tackle the fuel system. So I got the last fitting for the fuel pump, and I think I'd mentioned before, I put a new fuel tank, or newer fuel tank. I'll put a picture up of the tank that came out of this car, or what was left of it. So it has a new to this car fuel tank, and the way that the filler neck gets installed in this car is this elbow here. This little groove gets an O-ring that gets pushed into the tank this way, and then this piece comes up and meets the filler neck, and then this flange gets mounted in the fin right there. So this came out of the same car that the fuel tank came out of, which is in pretty good shape. And then this piece was out of the disaster that we're working on now. The coupler on this thing, I don't know if you can hear it, but it's hard as a rock. And so is this. So I'm pretty fortunate. I live about 10 minutes away from East Coast Restorations, so I called them up. They had a new fuel tank hose kit in stock, so I just ran and grabbed that. So I'm going to remove both couplers off of these two, clean this one up a little bit, maybe paint it, not sure. But once we do that, we can install that fitting, put fuel in it, and the fuel system is done. So I'm going to clean these two up, and then I'll bring you back when we're ready to install this. Alright, all back together. Everything new, hard to see in there. But that new O-ring is on the filler neck, pressed into the tank. Vent line is plumbed, 2 fresh clamps. And we have the filler neck secured in the quarter panel. So I'm going to take that brass fitting. I'm going to put that in the fuel pump, clamp the line to this. Fuel system should be done. So after that, I think we are going to focus on mounting the seat. Maybe we'll clean the floors up a little bit, throw some paint on them. Then it's going to be throw fuel in this thing and see if it runs. So let's finish up the fuel system and we'll go from there. Okay, so I have a plan for mounting this seat. The only reason this seat is going in the car is because that's what I had laying around. So it has this piece of angle stock welded onto the bottom of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to locate this rib I already started painting the floor, but I'm going to locate it in this rib of the floor, and then I'm going to weld those 2 pieces of square stock on either side that will sit against the top of this. You could send a hole through both, bolt it up, and that will give us a seat. I think that's the plan. That's what I'm going to try. If it doesn't work, I can always just cut this off, and start from scratch. But I think that's what we're going to try. So let's see if it'll work. Okay. Tabs welded onto the seat. Drilled some holes to go through the floor. Made a template out of O-tag. Transferred the holes to the floor itself. Ran to Home Depot, spent $600 on hardware to mount said seat. So let's see if this thing fits. Alright, have a seat. I sat in it, I didn't fall through onto the ground, so I'm going to call that a success for now. So seat is done, fuel system is done. Oh, next thing we have to do is, there is no ignition switch in this car, and I have a new switch, but I don't know if any of the wiring is there. So what I may end up doing is just wiring in an auxiliary switch to turn on the ignition, and another like momentary push button, just so we can start this thing from inside the car without the little trigger that I already had set up over there. So we may have to come up with something for that, but I think the next thing that I'm going to do is clean this thing out, vacuum it out, and I'll continue painting like I started over here. I just wanted to get this section done so I can mount the seat, but I'd like to do the entire inside of the car, just make it look a little bit better. So let me get all the stuff out of the back and we'll start doing that. Okay, next thing I want to take care of is getting a way to be able to start the car and arm the ignition from inside. So I picked up a battery junction box. I'm going to mount this probably somewhere on the firewall. A regular toggle switch, push button start, and then some terminal ends for this 4-gauge wire. And then I also have this like starboard material. I think I might make a little panel to put in the dash somewhere. I don't want to put any holes that don't belong in this car. It doesn't have any right now. That's a lie. But I'd rather just make a nice panel to kind of hide it. This way I'm not hogging out holes in the dash. So we're going to find a place for this. We'll mount the switches. We'll get this mounted on the firewall. Once that's done, we can wire everything up, and then we will be able to bump the engine over from inside the car rather than using a little trigger under the hood. So I will get started on that and bring you back when it's done. So what we have so far is I ran the wiring from the switch panel inside through that hole in the firewall, which is for part of the original wiring harness that's long gone. I mounted the battery junction block there, and then I have power going to the switch panel from this junction port. Obviously we're gonna clean everything up, and I just loomed this harness, and then this is that 4-gauge wire that goes to our positive battery posts. So bring you guys inside. I still have to trim the switch panel a little bit. I cut it a little too big, but I'll take care of that tomorrow. Seat might be the most uncomfortable thing ever. So this is the panel. We're going to mount this over the radio, but I'll trim it there and actually attach it. But arm it, engine start light. That's it. So now we have successfully bypassed the ignition switch, which the wiring is not there for. But we'll at least be able to start the car. Alrighty, so we got some fresh fuel in this thing. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to unplug the HEI distributor so we don't have any ignition, and just bump this motor over a couple times and try and get some fuel up to the filter, check for leaks in the fuel system. If that goes well, I'll plug the ignition back in, give it a couple pumps of the carb, and see if we can get this thing to light off. Clearly no luck. cranking the car to get any fuel up. So I pulled the mechanical fuel pump out. Number one, to make sure that the push rod that gets moved by the camshaft was in there. Sometimes, depending upon who put this thing together or when, they may have forgotten it. Push rod was in there, and the other thing I did was just pushed on this diaphragm with my thumb over the inlet to see if I had any suction, and I did not. So I just ran, this is actually the new pump, the old one is, I don't know, thrown somewhere in the yard. I don't know how that happened, but I'll find out later. Or I'll run it over with the lawnmower in a couple months and probably shatter a window just to add to the expense of this. But, new fuel pump. I'm going to put this in, reattach the lines. I did make sure I got one with the same 1/4 inch fittings, so I don't have to make another trip back to the store. So I'm going to get this put in, and we'll try it again. Alright, so we got the new pump in, and just to prime the fuel line, because I was still having a problem, I just used a hand primer, put this in the feed line, and pumped until I got fuel up to the fuel pump. So hopefully now I have the ignition disconnected. When we crank on it, we'll actually be able to fill the fuel filter. So let's see what happens. So the battery is still a little unhappy. I don't know if you could see it, but we actually are starting to get fuel into the filter now, so that's a good sign. I have the battery tender on it now, so I'm going to let that sit for a little bit, hopefully get this thing a charge, and then we'll try and fill that up all the way and see if we can get this thing to idle. Alright, so finally some success. I think I'm going to call it here. It's getting a little late. Obviously I have to look into the timing and probably some carburetor adjustments, but the fuel pump finally primes. We have fuel up to the carb, and it starts off of a button inside the car. So that's much further along than we were a couple of weeks ago. Next video, hopefully, will be driving this thing for the first time. I might have to look into possibly doing some sort of exhaust on this too, because it's pretty loud, and for some reason my neighbors still like me, and I want to keep it that way. But yeah, that's going to be it for this one. Thank you guys for checking it out, and hopefully the next video will be a couple of last minute things that need to be buttoned up, and maybe the first drive in a very long time. So thank you guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.